Thank
Thank you.
It would be,
Last week I took it 2 days. I was going to take it today, but somebody's.
I guess, I don't know now because everybody, like, after the pandemic.
And I'm worried it's
Okay.
right.
Now everybody.
From
I have those
like private sector hired.
get on.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'll just email everyone who we previously talked about and just ask someone on the email, just
Yeah.
for CSX, find that person. and then get-
For the first stuff.
You might,
Not gonna work, right?
Commissioner House. You might want to consider not including CSX
So I take the,
Yeah.
because I think it's better
Like.
because you've got TRV, right? So like anything that BPRA can and can't do will be under the.
I think it's more work.
They're-
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like BPRA would be able to say, no, we're
And I
not
put
gonna
my laptop.
do that.
Staff
You don't
always
think that's a
know,
good idea, or that's something you can't do under the.
Right.
Start-
Okay, that makes sense.
Hey, what is that?
And
And
because
what's
they-
that?
the whole
They
point
get
of
to the office.
is to like,
10
so that
emails
CSX doesn't have to mess
complaining,
and,
so,
Yeah.
when I take it,
you know,
I get-
passenger rail affairs at a certain point.
But then I have to leave,
Divorce.
Okay, yeah, that makes
have
sense.
to leave
Okay. Well,
slightly earlier, because that's when the train. There's only one train every 2 hours a day of train, so if you don't pick up, I'm here
Yeah.
until 8. But then again, I can get the train,
Sometimes it's a good excuse to. Yeah.
good. How about yourself?
like work on the train again.
Yeah.
A little jet lag.
You can't do it.
I'm a little tired.
Good morning. I'm going to call to order the TAC Technical Committee meeting for September 9. I wanted to actually begin with introductions. We have a few new faces. Good morning. I'm Paul Yellow. I'm the TAC chair, and we can go to my right.
Ian Hollis, I'm the FAMPA administrator.
Rodney Weiss, Boston County.
Matthew Lahane, Stafford County.
Adam Derrick, Stafford County.
And me, I'm Lita Hinkle with Fampo.
Leader was one of our interns who's now full-time doing our GIS and data analysis. So welcome. If you haven't met Eugene, Eugene is our new public engagement and Title VI coordinator. I think, introduce it the last track, did I? Yeah. Sorry. Carry on. I'm not in charge, there's the.
Sure.
Welcome, Donna.
Thank you and welcome all.
Got one more.
I'm sorry.
It's not gonna, Mike Ferguson.
When you didn't get this out of the table.
It's okay, we don't need to.
Yeah.
Regional transit.
I'm used to Fredericksburg. Yeah, we are.
Cassie Lord, VDOT.
There you go.
We also have Matt Healy online,
Great.
PRPT.
Right.
Hi.
Welcome, Matt.
Very good. So next item, we can go to the roll call and the committee.
All right, Paul Amira,
Here.
Jamie Jackson, Matthew Lahane,
Here.
Bassam Amin,
Here.
Kathy Coffey, Adam Derrick,
Here.
Melody Fowler. Here. Amy Garbarini, Kate Gibson. Here. Christine Hefner, Leon Hughes, Daniel Koenig, Cassie Lord. Here. Stephen Minor, Nick Ruiz,
Here.
Bob Schneider, and Rodney White.
Here.
Right, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item is the approval of the TAC agenda. We do have two tip amendments, which are basically stapled to the agenda. It's resolution 3511, which we would like to add to the agenda. I'll make a motion to add those two items.
I'll second.
Second, okay.
I'll second.
Are there any other comments on the agenda? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Next item is the review of the policy committee.
Thank you. Lena, if you could just pull up the policy committee agenda from the website, not the TAC agenda, just so that we can refer to it. I usually, for the new folks, This is something historically that's been done, and I do it very quickly because some of these items you have already seen because they came to the TAC before they went to the policy committee, so then I don't talk about them all over again. So if we can scroll down, Leader, to the new item 7 onwards. There we go. So those were in the consent agenda, the tip items which came to you. So those are items that you've already seen. Scroll down to 9. Yeah. So we had a presentation by the VPRA. Unfortunately, a little bit of a long presentation, but it explained the new siding through Stafford County and the fact that the Leland Road Bridge has to be removed and reconstructed to make space for the third track. And there's a public meeting coming up in September. I forget the date. In order to,
Well,
yeah, something like the 12th, to discuss the timeline and the work schedule for the removal of that bridge, because it's going to have traffic impacts for about 2 years while they build the new bridge. So we alerted the policy committee to that. Then we've been looking at the crash rates on the northbound and southbound I-95. It's not something we did under SS4A, and Becky is a crash expert from her days teaching at the university. So we're continuing to look at that. The significant thing for us is that there's one segment in our region that has a higher crash rate, and that's the southbound lanes from US 17 to Route 3. Right, so it's basically the new bridges, those sections where the southbound lane has got a higher than normal amount of crashes. So we're trying to dig into that data, and we're going to carry on working with VDOT to try and understand what those crashes are all about, why there's so many of them, and then we can maybe propose a solution. But we can't propose a solution. We actually understand what's going on and why crashes are happening there. Yeah.
Are those the local lanes or through lanes?
We are not sure is the answer, because the data puts all of the crashes in one lane, and we think that that's not correct, but it might be because of the software. So we're trying to find out more information to answer that question. That's exactly the question we asked, and we don't have the answer. So instead of giving you nonsense, park it. We'll find out eventually. We'll work with VDOT and others and try and find out what that answer is. We don't know. They can't all be in the one lane. So that there's something not right there. It might just be a software glitch. We don't know. The remote participation, the state General Assembly has changed the legislation that applies to remote participation. So you now have to reauthorize your remote participation policy once every year. It's not a one-time deal that you've now got a policy. You have to reauthorize the policy. So we reauthorized that policy. And then you'll remember last year, I think it was, or earlier this year, we amended the TAC bylaws to allow for an online meeting in an emergency if we need one. So we suggested to the policy committee that they have a similar bylaw amendment. They haven't. It's not to change the policy committee bylaws involves a process. You don't just change bylaws. So you've got to read it out at a meeting. You've got to give 30 days for people to raise concerns and all that. So we just discussed it. No decision is taken at this stage. We're still waiting to hear comments and input from policy committee members or members of the public on whether or not we should have an online meeting facility for emergencies. It's not meant to be used unless there's a problem like a big snowstorm that wrecks the meeting and we have to cancel a meeting, or there's an emergency that we have to approve something and we don't have a scheduled meeting for December or for July, etc., etc. It's not meant to be used unless there's a problem. Road crossing update, keep doing those. We're reaching the end of the environmental part of the study. The letter of support for Swazi's planning grant was approved. And then it was correspondence, which is a letter we got from Caroline County requesting an opt-out if a regional transportation authority is established. And the King George TAP award. They received almost $900,000 for a project, and that's great to hear. Smart scale summary was, you saw that presentation. User fees for roads, that was something that the TAC actually asked for, and the question is, who pays for the roads? The cost of building and so on. And it's a complicated answer, and John did a study of the user. He did a study of the data that's available in Virginia for the Virginia road system. How much of it is paid by gas tax? How much of it is paid by toll fees? How much is paid by et cetera, et cetera. The VTA awards, that's old news to all of you, but we just congratulated everybody. The new park and ride route for FXB Go, we just put a punt in for that, alerting people the fact that the new route is now operational, the VRE feeder service. The Fredericksburg comprehensive plan are looking for public input on a survey, so we punted that. And then the functional classifications of the highways, we just put in another punt for that. So, Mr. Chair, that's basically the policy committee agenda for the month of August.
Thank you very much, Ian. Are there any questions of Mr. Ollis?
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
The letter of, maybe you can answer this actually, Paul, the letter of support, had you requested a letter of support from VRE?
Yes.
Okay. Who did you write that for?
I believe we sent it through Rich Dalton.
Okay, well, that takes care of it.
Sure. Okay. The next item is public comments. Are there any members of the public who would wish to speak? Yes.
Be surprised. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emma Watkins. I live in 1280 in the George Washington District of Stafford County. At some point in time in the near future, I'd like the TAC to speak about what is generally considered the largest project in the region, river crossing. As you're well aware, potential options, specifically the locations of the parkways, have evolved over time, including the current paths being modeled by a consultant. Some of the reasons for these modifications to the path has occurred because of both approved and planned developments of the region, causing the paths. At a recent policy committee meeting, 2 residents from the Del Webb community inquired about construction that was going on along Celebrate Virginia Parkway that they were unaware of. After asking the policy committee what was going on, they didn't receive any answers at that time. As it turns out, the tree removal, clearing, and grading that was occurring on parcel 44W-5E in the George Washington District was 13.7 acres that was previously owned by the corporate campus of Celebrate, Virginia, but sold to Steubenville Capital LLC in late 2021. The land appears to be by right, though I've not been able to get any confirmation about that. A permit was granted in late 2022 for the clearing and grading of that property, done in advance of a potential industrial park to be constructed on the land. As it turns out, Steubenville appears to be a subsidiary of the Silver Company, as it appears that their company office is located at the very same address as the Silver Company, Florida. As I said before, the path where our parkway may go, if we hit a new northern route to our region, have been modified. All of the current options make use of an extension to Commerce Parkway in Stafford County. This extension of Commerce Parkway is crucial, especially since the Stafford County plans to create a new northern route continuing on from Plantation Drive to Trustlow to Enon and then connecting to Centerport Parkway, and then going north further in the future. This parcel, 45.5E, is the property where Commerce Parkway was going to be extended to enable the majority of these parkway options. It is yet another potential obstacle altering all of the hard work and expense that's been put into this river crossing project already. It's my hope that TAC, along with FAMPO staff, can inform the public about the impact that this new unexpected development may have on the river. Thank you.
Does anyone else in the room think
Bit chilly.
we're going to turn off fans and maybe? Okay, so the next agenda item is the consent agenda. Are there any comments on the? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to the consent agenda. Is there a second? All in favor? Any opposed? The motion passes. That brings us down to number 7, the tip amendments and modifications. And just as a reminder, we've added those 2 additional tip amendments, 2510 and 2511. I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions about any of the amendments.
Yep, so question about 7C, the Brook Road Flood Mitigation Resiliency Project. Lita, would you be able to bring it up on screen possibly? Item C, 7C. And then just the tip box on a second. So I guess a question for VDOT, the tip, I guess, sheet that we had sent, it had included funding in FY27. Is there a reason why the FY27 funding was not included in this?
Is it funding from the county or funding from
It's the federal funding.
federal funding?
I'm just, I guess, looking for information for how the funding was, I guess, partially selected here.
Funding obligated yet?
How do you term obligated? We have not yet signed the grant agreement.
That's why.
Will have to be another tip amendment.
Which means another amendment once it's signed.
Yeah, we're required to include this in the tip as a part of our NEPA phase. So it's going now. We're looking for a bit more information why the funding was shown how it is here.
The obligated funds.
Yeah, so if you haven't signed the contract, then it won't appear there, I guess.
But it will be the requirement.
Exactly. Okay. All right, sounds good.
Are there any other comments on the tip amendments? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to approve all the tip amendments under item number 7. Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passed. Which brings us down to number 8. The FAMPO Miss Day, FAMPO Travel Demand Model Update with Mr. Jonathan.
Chair, if we can just introduce, VDOT owns the model, just so everybody is clear. We call it the FAMPO model, but it's owned by VDOT. VDOT has to now, by law, update the model every 5 years. It used to be every 7 years. It's now every 5 years. So Jonathan and the team at VDOT have been doing that. Jonathan is the consultant working for VDOT, not for FAMPO or VDOT. And he has been working with the VDOT modeling staff to update that model. We've sent you over the last year, actually, queries about, your population, the jobs data, or your which streets are missing from the model and all that. We've sent stuff to the transit agencies. Hey, Fred, tell us when your 2050 road, what your proposed routes are. We've asked VRE to tell us their ridership numbers are. Jonathan has been working with VDOT to work on all of that. And Jonathan is actually based in Texas. So thanks very much for coming up to meet with us and also to your other meetings. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan and he's going to take it away and explain what's been done to the new model and then take your questions. So thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, and please don't hold Texas again.
I was from Texas, just FYI.
I am not from 20+ years.
It'll surprise you, I'm not from Texas either.
So good morning. I apologize for starting your week off talking about travel demand modeling. Try to keep it at a high level. Ian told me I had about 10 minutes or so to present, and then we can switch to Q&A. So we'll try to stick with that. But as Ian said, I work for WRA. Many of you are probably familiar with the name. We're very, well, we're everywhere around this part of the state, Maryland, etc. We've been working with VDOT to develop the update for the regional model. So we'll get into what that means here. This works. Right. I'll let you just advance so we don't fuss with that. Okay. Anyhow, just for a little bit of background, I'm sure many of you have heard what is a plan model or heard model this, model that, black box, etc. At simple terms, a travel demand model is a set of mathematical equations and a digital twin, if you will, in your community. It's a framework to allow you to ask questions. It's not going to give you the exact answer. Even a dead watch is right twice a day. But the idea is you can put in different assumptions about your land use, about your infrastructure, about different policies, and be able to answer questions about need for investment, the effectiveness of those different investments, etc. So these are just some kind of bullet points that come out of VDOT's policy manual about what a travel demand model is. But that top one is very important. It's used to support the transportation planning process. It's an integral part of the plan development, used to evaluate projects for the TIP, etc. But then it also is used at a finer level when we get involved in traffic forecasts for new roadways, new bridges, corridors. The model is that starting. So it's very important that we have a great model to start with. And like I said, there's lots that goes into them in terms of your demographics. As you said, we reached out to many of you to get some feedback, things about transit systems, etc. That all goes into the mix to help us develop the model. So there we go. So I'm a modeler. We got to have a flow chart in every spreadsheet. It's a requirement. Check. Basically, a travel demand model at the highest level, just to kind of give everybody a baseline, there's 4 main steps in what we call a trip-based travel demand. You have trip generation. How many trips will be made based on the characteristics of the household, the type of employment, volume of your major roadways as they enter the system. I-95 comes to mind. Those are things that generate our trip generation. The second step is trip distribution. You have households over here, many choices for employment or jobs or shopping. So the trip distribution is how those trips that are generated to where they want to go. Mode choice, what modes are available and what mode are you going to use for your trip? Are you going to drive alone? Are you going to share a ride? Are you going to take transit, etc.? And then finally, rubber meets the road, trip assignment. How we actually estimate the traffic on through the model. Lots of details into how all of that works. I'm happy to answer those types of questions if anybody really wants to get dirty on Monday morning. All right, so one of the things that we wanted to highlight is, as Ian mentioned, it is an update to a model. The region has had a travel demand model in place for quite some time. I actually worked with Paul on a previous generation of that model. I think met in this room, did some training many years ago. In any case, we've been not only updating the model to a current base year, but also adding some new functionality to help with types of questions and issues that you're facing in the community as in transportation world as a whole. Something that's very important in this region is long distance commuting. It's a community that people travel to Northern Virginia, DC, even Richmond. How is that captured in the model? E-commerce. You all are receiving a lot more deliveries directly at home or placing orders, going to the store to pick them up. That's really changing a lot of our shopping patterns and some of your commercial corridors, etc. work from home. And we're all enjoying some of the benefits of what was an interesting time in our past. But that has obviously impacts on the amount of travel that you see on your roadway system. So the model being able to accommodate that. Transportation network companies, Ubers, Lyfts, all those things we don't know about yet, and how they are not only changing your mode choices, but adding to the traffic as they circulate through the system, going to their next destination or next fare. And then lastly, connected technologies. We all know our cars are collecting a lot of information about us. As that evolves, the next step is how they're going to be communicating with transportation. Telling the signal you're coming, communicating with the cars around you. How does the model account for that? How do you see the benefits of that in your choices about projects? So some interesting new knobs that will allow the region to play with as we go forward. As I mentioned, a big part of the model has been developing inputs. This is probably a little bit of an eye chart for you in the back row, so I apologize, but this, I believe, is in your packet for your reading enjoyment later. What we've just summarized here is some of the key model inputs. We have households, population, and then the type of employment by county. In the model itself, it is actually represented at what we call traffic analysis zones. So about the size, somewhere between a block and a block group, the census. And we appreciate everybody's input as we've gone through this process in helping us refine these numbers. But we have this information in the model for 2022, which is our base year in 2050. You can see there's been estimated some pretty substantial growth in your households as well as your employment. And then you've got some of the counties like Stafford, which are some of the major contributors to that growth in both the household side and employment. As I mentioned, a big component of the model is what we call our network or digital twin of your transportation system. On the far left, we're showing the highway network. The green and red are the planned improvements that were already committed in the region. These are the things we know are going to happen to bring the network from 2022 up to 2050. The projects that Ian and his team are working on for the plan, et cetera, would be on top of these types of projects. Then on the middle and right, we have the representations of the transit system. The middle is the current system, including some of the routes going to Virginia. And then on the right, we've included the reconfiguration of the FXE Go transit system. All right, so we have a lot of inputs. We understand what the model's supposed to do. How do you get credibility for using this tool? A couple of things. One is kind of buy-in of those input data. We're all in agreement on this forecast. The other is what we call model validation. And this is as we build the model, we evaluate it against other observed data for each step in those 4 sequences. But the one most people know about is the comparison of the model to the traffic counts. What we're interested in is the traffic in the right place, is the congestion in the right place. VDOT provides some good criteria that we use and work with them on making sure the model conforms to the end of the day. So what this does is it allows you to have confidence in the model. It's documented, it meets best practice, it gives the region credibility and confidence in using it going forward. Also, a big issue is the black box. Models are often thought of as this black box, they're voodoo, what goes in it. A big challenge is communication, being able to convey the information that goes into the model and good information that comes out to help. So with that, there are a whole host of things one can use a travel demand model for. Really, your imagination from a transportation planning is the limits. Just some examples that I came up with here, kind of going from a macro down to a project level. Some questions you can ask the model: evaluating transportation policies, whether it's parking, whether it's changes in work from home. Those types of things can be input into the model. You can identify, using the model, areas that are at risk for congestion. Given the growth, where are you seeing congestion, where are you seeing delays that can point to the need for investment. Another one is this idea of identifying opportunities for economic development. You can use the model to help you make good site locations or identify the sites that have great accessibility to workers, to the transportation system, for example, without further impeding congestion. And then sensitivity to new modes. We talked a little bit about the TNCs, for example, or things we may not even know are coming. Outputs to help answer those questions. You have regional performance measures. Probably everybody's heard of things like vehicle miles traveled or vehicle hours of travel or delay, level of service, etc. These are the types of things that the model can generate for the entire region, by county, or even go down to more detail. Sub-regional planning, say there's a corridor or a downtown, for example. The model can also be used to help study those more localized transportation questions, understand the interaction of that sub area or the sub region with the entire region. Some areas use their models to do sub area plans that then roll up together, for example. And again, those same types of regional, same performance measures can be generated, those finer level of detail, and even start to look at some of the volume generated analysis. And then finally, where a lot of my team works is when we get into projects, new bridges, new roadway widenings, etc., new interchanges. Model become a first step in that analysis of helping to define those projects. So real quickly, with a few minutes, I'm already over. What does the TEM say about the region for 2050 so far from what we've put in? So as part of our contract, we developed the 2022 base year model, as well as the 2050 committed project model. Best way to describe it. We've gone in there, turned the crank, and got some information. So some interesting things that I'll get into here in a minute. Talk about, how does the household growth translate to the vehicle miles of travel? Housing is growing at a rate as travel, etc. How does that VMT growth translate to vehicle hours of travel? People having to spend longer to travel because of that growth. Indications of the system being further stressed. Is the investment keeping pace with that change in delay, or is the investment in the right place? So these are some of the types of regional questions. As I alluded to earlier, we're seeing lots of growth in the housing and employment. When we translate that to the model, in terms of vehicle miles of travel, we're seeing almost 50% increase in vehicle miles of travel. The good thing is we're seeing that kind of spread throughout the system. This is actually distribution. So you can see actually that the interstate is carrying a slightly less share of that travel in the future. You have some of the more local system growing, taking up some of that distribution. We all know where the housing is occurring, so you're going to start to see some of those delays in that region as well. Vehicle hours of travel almost doubling, 104% from 2022 to 2050. It's growing across the system, even though your freeways, your interstates have a slightly lower share of the growth in VMT. They are, almost doubling in the vehicle hours of travel. We're also seeing a large increase in the vehicle hours of travel in the rural areas, which is consistent with where we're seeing a lot of. Finally, then the question is, well, what are we doing about it? What we're seeing is that overall, your change in lane miles Lane miles are expensive, unfortunately. It's not easy to build your way out of congestion. As you can see from the previous graphs, and, there's much more information that we'll be extracting from the model to help you understand that balance of where you're making investments and where they're needed. So, hope that was a little bit of use. Like I said, we can get into some questions. In terms of getting access to the model for any types of project applications, obviously the MPO will be getting the data and use the model to support the planning. But if there's interest for consultants or others to use the model, Ying is the model coordinator for this region at TMPD. Contact information. Ian said VDOT supports and invest in the model. Available to help the MPO, also provide the model as needed for studies, etc. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
I had a question. Nick Ruiz from BRE. So I'm curious, in past model development processes, it's been a pretty known fact that it doesn't capture the commuter rail mode relative to other transit when it comes to like number of trains leaving, what the demand should be versus what it actually is. Have there been any refinements in this process to look at, or revalidation to look at kind of how commuter rail in this region works? Because I think with the amount of frequency in service that you have, the model would say you're going to get much less ridership than you actually.
Sure. Yeah, and you're right. It is a challenge model because you have the attractor for all of those commuter trips outside interest area. Right. In this particular case, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but I think our validation of the BRE routes was actually pretty good. What we've done is kind of look at it as a alternative for the external trip. So that's where the mode choice is being made, not for local trips, but for those trips that are leaving. The balance and trade-off, heat break, just to travel by north, but you're considering travel time.
Yeah.
So it is a challenge, and the model has produced good results this time. Obviously, we use the local routes and their connection to them, so it's an integrated system. So we do provide that integration as well. In the future, the new BRE feeder routes are included. We've also included the slugging as a mode option. Trips going to the van pool system. Actually model the trips from home going to those van pool lots and then connecting to other users in the van. So it's a good input or a starting point for a study, for example, like if you're trying to do something very specific. Travel demand models, especially when you're dealing with transit ridership, better tools. What we try to do is at least capture regional impacts and trade-offs for the trips coming in.
If you have a detailed question, maybe you could email it and then have Jonathan just respond. So like, hey, does it show 50 ridership being X?
Yeah.
And he can also sort of a specific.
I mean, I think your statement pretty much sums it up. I mean, it's a good starting point for transit, ridership estimation, but there's better tools available. And that's how we've always used the travel demand models for here, and also the COG models. It's the starting point, and then we do off model adjustments because of things we know that just aren't going to be captured. But
trains, 4-hour headway doesn't mean
right.
But it's the transit is focused on peak versus off peak.
Yeah.
Does a good job from a region.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Ebner?
Yep.
Matthew?
I guess just one question. Do you know if at the start of this process, there was any consideration about switching away from Cube and using a different program, such as I don't know, Transcat or any other child domain modeling programs, Cube is not necessarily known for its ease of use.
True.
For instance, I could go into Transcat right now and I think I can figure it out pretty easily. Simply GIS-based scripting in Python, very simple. Cube is not that, I guess.
You're correct. We use both, and there's some that, there's some things that work better in one, and some things that work better. Would be a question for, Ying and Pong as to uses like alternatives. There are some things happening on the Cube side through its user experience. Their GIS tools are changing really dramatically. I'm sure Pong will want to help us, kind of make sure things are accessible. I think a big part of it is moving from the black box of the model to better interaction with it, and what that means, the types of things you're trying to access from it.
Okay.
So that would be probably a broad conversation, but I'd love to get out some feedback.
Yeah, I was told there's at least one MPO in the state who uses Transcat, but I think everyone else uses Cube. I think Northern Virginia uses something else. But yeah.
Yeah, Northern Virginia, like the
Activity center.
in Spaces is in Cube, but there's some open source things
Yeah.
for the command components. Charlottesville, and one other area that are in Transcat,
Yeah, New River Valley.
pluses and minuses.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan, as you wrap up the work on this, would we be able to get a congestion map of 2022 and a congestion map of 2050 out of the model?
Yes, that's probably one of the most common types of outputs is seeing those traditional types of BC maps. Level of service, peak versus conditions,
Yeah.
AM versus PM, your directionality, those things.
I'm just suggesting that I'd like to show those two just as an output. This is what we know from the new model.
Yeah, no, that would be something. Get wrap up the project with training John. That taking the model, not so much worrying about running the model, but that data extraction, and developing that information to help you process. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure what I'm talking about, but I'll ask you a question. Last week, we had like maybe 2 accidents in town,
Mhm.
and it affects a lot of streets, or it's congestions. And these, TDMs, are good tool for testing congestions. Do you think the Caytus should look into detour solutions? And if something happened, it could be, simple signages, timing adjustment at signals and things like that. Do you think this is, will help in the area? So these projects, it takes forever, like 20 years, 30 years to build and things like that. We're looking at right now. Yes.
Absolutely, and again, it's like, what is the type of information you're trying to get? We use these types of travel demand models all the time for what we call like resiliency studies. Is how resilient is the system to a failure of something. So one of the more common applications we do, close a bridge, reduce a lane on a key facility, rerun the model, and then you have the 2 scenarios to compare to see where that traffic redistributes. That then can become an input to helping you decide, like, where do you make those investments in signal systems, shoulder running, but whatever comes to mind. But you can use these types of models to help evaluate your mitigations strategies, and then it's a question of how do you trigger. we do work with what are called integrated corridor management tools. Model is ever modeling what's happening out there instantaneously. When something starts to go wrong, then like the system automatically deploys signal retiming on parallel corridors, starts putting up signage, those types of things. But those get more into the operational modeling. This is still at the planning level. I think it's very helpful. You could do a study. Okay, so say I-95 southbound closes at 4 o'clock because of an accident. What does that mean to travel time? What does that mean for emergency response vehicles to have to cross the region, etc.? So there's it's certainly part of the question of the tools.
Any other questions for Jonathan? Gates?
You mentioned, so the model does include slugging.
Yes.
Yeah. One slide, I won't speak long, but that one slide he showed, there's 5 different new modes of travel that we've tried to build into the model, like e-commerce, many more packages coming to your house. Work from home, many more people are working from home. How does that affect it? That list that he had there, it's incorporated a lot of those kind of things, which was sort of not really put into the model before. We've now tried to account for that. We also asked them to account for those developments just across the border from Spotsylvania in Orange County, which would affect the number of vehicles entering Route 3 in the future. So a lot of those little tweaks we asked them to pay attention to, and so it's not the perfect model to predict every one of those things, but it certainly now starts to account for working from home and increased parcel delivery at home and new projects that are coming on stream close by and that kind of thing. And so,
Thank you very much for your presentation, Jonathan.
thanks, Jonathan.
Okay, the next item is 8B, the RFP 2050 FY25 allocation people.
Presentation, attached to your TAC agenda, double-sided, document, the table that shows items that we are, recommending or asking the draft for your consideration of those items. You can go to the next slide. Those items which should be included in an upcoming, modification to the LRTP. And then those items which would be, recommended by staff to be held off full update. What I would like, as we, consider this, is discussion today, with Ian's input and your all's, as far as what do we need to update in the CLRP 2025 modification. Obviously, project need to be as a result of funding awards. At this point, we've just recommended that, and again, this is a draft consideration, that the current CLRP has the SMART scale round 1 through 4 projects listed, but not round 5, and then have potential round 6 awards. So with that, the remaining slides are merely the table that you have in front of you, representing the 4 slides. So Ian, do you want to kind of take it from here?
Yeah, so it's still not completely clear whether we're going to have to do a CLRP update now or whether it can wait. The 2 factors that to think about are, the first one is that at the end of 2025 calendar year, we no longer have to do the air quality conformity analysis. So after that updating the CLRP becomes a lot easier. You don't have to get people from Richmond to come up and do a public hearing and all that air quality stuff. Second thing is, if we have projects that are not in the CLRP, which have received funding, then we do have to put them in the CLRP. There's no debate about that. But if we have projects receive funding that are already in the CLRP, we don't need to add the project, it's already there. So it's unclear to us as staff yet whether we do need to update the CLRP with projects before the air quality conformity expires. If we do, we're happy to do it. Just as you know, it's quite a big process because you have to redo the financial calculations. And the two things, let's just be frank about this because this is public knowledge, it's not a secret. The percentage that we used to calculate the constrained list of projects is based on an inflation rate that was happening in 2020 and early 2021. If we redo it now, what automatically is going to happen is we're going to have to increase that inflation rate. Because if you've seen the construction inflation rate in the United States, it is astronomical for transportation infrastructure. So I'm telling you now, it's a fact that the inflation rate we used last time is not adequate for what's happening right now. So the minute we pull the plug and say we're going to update the CLRP, the amount of additional funding that might be available now that we didn't know about 2 years ago is not going to be nearly enough to cover the increase in the cost of the projects we have in the CLRP, which means actually we'll have to take projects off the CLRP, and we're going to be wanting to add projects to the CLRP. So it's going to pressurize the whole system, which means we'll get complaints because now my favorite project is no longer on the list because now we have to make the list shorter. So these are all moving parts, right? And there's no final answer on a lot of these. However, if you know of a project that has received TAP award funding or is about to receive smart scale funding, when that happens and the funding is awarded, we have no option but to add it to the CLRP because it has to be in the CLRP. If it's got $1 of funding on it, there's no option. But if it hasn't got actual funding on it, then it is optional and decide whether to put it in the CLRP based on our own needs. So for us as staff, you tell us if you know of a project. If that does, it's going to trigger the whole process. If you don't have one, it can wait. So we're looking for guidance from you. And the attached list that Becky put there is a list of suggestions. And there are 2 columns. The one column is talks about this list, which is in your pack. Ticks on the right is we have to do that in FY27 when we do the new LRTP. Column second to the right is things that we could choose to update before we get, or modify before we get to the full update, which we could probably do in-house. So those are 2 different columns. In the right is we'll have to do that. There's no option. In the column called include in the FY25-2050 LRTP modification, we'd like to update those things. Do you think there's value in doing that? It's my job to advise TAC, but it's also the TAC's job to advise me, right? So I'm actually asking you to advise me if you think or see things that we should know.
First, Matthew.
Yeah, so Ian, with regards to demographics and future trends, I guess a question and a comment, when will we plan to update the totals for 2050? Or will you be waiting until 2055 to update the maximum population jobs that are being projected?
Well,
'Cause I know that hasn't been updated since 2015, 2017.
The current LRTP has got the 2020 census population data
Right.
in it. So which data are you specifically?
The population growth for Stafford County that suggests we will have 276,000 residents by 2050.
And that is not in the LRTP.
That is in the current LRTP. When will we have an opportunity to update those figures for the average?
So the 2055 update, which is the one we will do in FY27, we'll have to do that.
Yes, will we be able to do it for 2050 or is the plan to just do it for 2050?
So I'm not planning to change it for 2050 for the simple reason that, and this is the advice we're seeking, right? If you fiddle with one aspect of the numbers, you're gonna have to start running the models. And then when you do that, each thing you change has an impact on the next lot of thing, particularly when you do modeling or change the population numbers. And so that's a whole package of work. You can't just change one number. You then have to run the model again, do all the maps again, do all the, each thing you change, there's a knock-on effect of 5 other things you have to change, because otherwise you push the population up, but now the model outputs that you put in the maps in the LRTP are no longer valid. They're valid for a different population number. But we did use the updated 2020 census numbers. We did not finish the LRTP before those numbers were out. So the population numbers should be accurate in terms of the 2020 census.
So Ian, I wanted to go back just to the conformity requirement with CRP. So basically, to basically avoid triggering that with a regionally significant project, we'd have to wait until the end of
December the 31st, 2025, by law, it's been published in the, we call it the Government Gazette. I forget the name in the US, but the Federal Register has published that is our last date for which we have to do air quality conformity. After that date, we still have to do the modeling, but we no longer have to do the separate process.
Okay. So I know like some of the small federal projects like the TAP are now regionally significant, so they wouldn't trigger that, but do we know if we have basically a regionally significant project to add to the potential CRP before the end of 2025 that would trigger that?
So it's really, I think, about smart scale, because I don't think any locally administered or locally revenue shared project is not already in the CLRP or is significant enough to trigger that. Because we don't, as FAMPA, always receive the information on revenue sharing projects and locally administered projects, there may be one there. But in terms of smart scale, we did this exercise when we saw the the round 5 project approvals, and we didn't need to change the CLRP. But the ones in the round 6 smart scale, we will hear in January the preliminary scoring. So we don't know yet whether any of those projects are going to be funded until at least we start scoring, and then only a few months later when we actually get the yes, because last year the CTB cancelled 2 of our projects and added 2 others which were not initially scored. So, the other way around. We had 2 projects in Stafford which were scored well, and then the CTB decided not to fund them. Actually, one in Stafford and one in King George County. Anyway, all that to say, we will only know which of our round 6 projects get funding in the new year, in the new calendar year. And at that point, we will then, if there is a project that is not currently in the CLRP that receives funding, we'll have to go and do that. But a number of those projects are actually already in the CLRP. They sometimes don't have a full explanation in the CLRP. It was sort of a very high level kind of listing, so there's information that's not there, but they are often not projects we have to add. So what we can do for the next TAC is just go through the CLRP and go through the submitted smart scale projects now that they've been submitted formally, and just tick off and see if there's one that, if it gets funded, is not in that list. But if there isn't one, then or if the ones that actually get funded are ones that have been in this CLRP for 10 years, no change would be required based on the smart scale round. And as you say, the TAP round, it's not a big regionally significant project. So that's why we're asking the question, instead of saying, this is what we think we should do, we're saying, what does the TAC think we should do?
The thought that I had is, can wait, not just be triggered to need to do conformity, we should wait. I guess I would look to VDOT, like if there's any project that's funded in smart scale to date, or some other project that basically FAMPA has to add basically to its CRP for the end of 2025, basically which would trigger this conformity requirement. We're not trying to create more work, just asking the question.
So some of the projects that are
that has UPC, it does have some funding on it, so that may not. Another one that I assumed included was from the previous. Another one that's upcoming potentially would be the fourth one. So, you know, if that is funded. So you just, you know, without doing much of a search, just. Up with, that's a two.
So in the interest of time, what I will do, or what I would suggest, that campus staff takes the list of smart scale projects that are recent and checks that against the CLP. It just brings you a list back at the next meeting and says, this is what we know is a fact. And then if anybody in the interim before the next meeting knows of another big project that we might not have thought about, just pop us an email, those against the CLRP as well. And then we can bring you a definitive answer to the next meeting as to the projects that we know about. And then if anybody knows of another one, then let us know. But we'll do that and present a little table. I'm guessing it's going to be a very short list, if any at all.
That sounds reasonable to me. Do you want a motion from the committee?
We'll just do it. But what I suggest you also do before the next meeting is just look through this. If you see anything else that you think is going to need updating, tell us. If there are no projects and we don't have to update the CLRP, then what I suggest we do is we just do where there are textual amendments needed and where there are, you know, like FXV Go, we might need to want a new route map that we can add, stuff like that. We can do a short modification that involves mostly text and charts and tables and that kind of thing, and leave the CLR so that we don't have to start calculating compound interest and all of that other stuff, which is, so I suggest that unless somebody can point to a project that we will have to add, then we just do the textual type updates. And for example, the disability community is a bit grumpy with us that we haven't responded to their request to add some of those disabled goals into our goals. Now, when you change the goal, it's not going to necessarily have to change the entire LRTP. You can actually just ask the policy committee to amend the goals, right? So that when we do the next update, we look at those goals when we look at projects that we're picking and all that kind of thing. So those are simpler updates. I suggest that that's what we do.
Sounds reasonable. I did have one quick question that's
Yes.
beyond like the first kind of sheet, basically in our packet, basically for the table. For the travel demand modeling, it's under like the 25th application, but it's not. What to update on that front?
Which line is it? Yeah, okay, that is actually an error. That should be in 2055. We don't need to redo the model unless we're going to change projects or change the population. So I would just move that X over to the other column, frankly.
Sure, that's great.
Sounds great. Okay,
All done?
all good.
Thanks. We just wanted to quantify the problem because start work on this. We don't want to go all over the place. We want to just quantify what we're going to do, get that done and bring it to you.
Okay. So there's nothing else, maybe? So we will move forward on to 8C, the CMAC STBG CR prioritization methodology with Dr. Whitehouse.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to let you know that we are starting to on the process of re-reviewing how we divide up the CMAC funding. This is kind of the first initial steps. But before we do, I just want to bring everybody up to speed of how we're currently funding those projects and where it's going. So if we look back on the entire spreadsheet, add up all the totals, you can see this is the current distribution of all the funds. So right now, I think it's about 42% or about 24 million. Stafford is receiving about 17 million. Fredericksburg is getting just under 10 million, and regional set aside is about 6 million. I'm including all transit in the regional category because even though there might be a project that was, say, sponsored in a specific jurisdiction that Fred applied for, Fredericksburg applied for, it's still kind of servicing a regional benefit. So a lot of the transit is here as well as any set aside, so our contingency funds that might be listed in there. We know that they are probably going to be rolled in and spent elsewhere, but they're just kind of parked in the regional funds for now until they are selected. So that's where we stand for the full 6 years. If we look back on our last 2 rounds, so the last 3 years, you can see that the distribution is a little bit different. Spotsylvania has gotten a little bit over 50% of the funds, and then Fredericksburg and Stafford and the regional is a bit less in the teens. However, the previous year, it was actually very different before that, where you actually had a scenario where Stafford received the bulk of the funds, the regional set aside with there's money parked for a while, and then Spotsylvania had 21% of the funds. So this is getting into kind of a goal of achieving a different process, is to create a more consistent and known allocation formula. So it's not a feast or famine for each jurisdiction depending on the rounds. Hopefully this will allow localities to prioritize their own projects rather than kind of throwing 5 projects at FAMPO and seeing which one scores the best to set the priority. We're going to allow the jurisdictions to set the priority and divide the money in a known fashion. And then we can also review and kind of reassess the data that's going into this formula every 5 years to know exactly, okay, is this amount of money matching kind of growth or different trends in the region that we want to address? So that was kind of the goals to set it for. The next item is, okay, we're going to set up a formula, what approach we're going to be. And in this first step, staff kind of said, okay, where are people currently are and where are they going? So that kind of is kind of what's leading the initial steps, and we want your feedback on that as far as how the funds are going to be distributed. There's a couple of things. We can look at total population. Just very big and simple. We can look at the population of the urbanized areas. What's feeding into some of these formulas. We can look at jobs in each of the districts. Your composite, we can do this, you can do economic activity. We have a couple of different options depending on how y'all want to point us of how to develop that methodology. So if we look at just population, you'll see 48, 43, 9%. That will be fairly clear cut on that. However, if you start looking at, okay, what's in the MPO's urbanized area, the population is a little bit different because surprisingly enough, Spotsylvania has a very large rural population. So it gets divided a little bit more. If we look at jobs, it's actually very different from where our residents are living. So if you look at jobs, all of a sudden Fredericksburg becomes a lot bigger player because it's actually somewhat of a hub coming in. So we'll see it's distributed a little bit differently. So that's where folks are going to and from. Well, how about if we start looking at where they're actually traveling, or more or less, not necessarily where people in Stafford or people in Spotsylvania or people in Fredericksburg traveling to or from. How much actually traffic is being generated in that jurisdiction, so that if you have somebody saying going from Spotsylvania to Stafford, that little bit of information is even picked up in Fredericksburg. So we look at daily vehicle miles traveled in the region, in urban areas by facility types per capita, and we can have some composites as well. So if we just take the daily vehicle miles traveled, whole jurisdiction, Stafford takes up about half the pie, and then Spotsylvania and Fredericksburg a little bit less. If you start looking about the urbanized area, again, all of a sudden, kind of Spotsylvania's larger rural area kind of falls off, but Stafford remains about 50%, and Fredericksburg slowly starts climbing in that metric. If we start looking at daily vehicle miles traveled and facility mile as a composite as a whole, you see that as a whole, kind of Fredericksburg starts picking a little bit more. You start to see the effect that Fredericksburg kind of ties the region together, and they are actually having a lot more traffic. And I actually broke this down a little bit. If you really want to go by mile, if I showed an item of where just Fredericksburg was 50%, it's basically per mile is doubling the traffic. There's a lot more traffic impact on Fredericksburg's roads than the counties. But that being said, it makes sense. There's a large amount of rural lane miles out there that has a lot less traffic, so it's kind of balancing. Then we looked at daily vehicle miles traveled as a burden per capita. Again, this is how many miles of traffic are being generated each in one of the districts per capita. And Fredericksburg is very high on this as well. I actually started pulling some national trends. If we look at this, say the number of daily vehicle miles traveled per lane mile and per capita, Fredericksburg ranks 4th nationally out of anything. We are far beyond any of the urban areas. Actually, Jonathan Abner, thank you for the recommendation, because I had to look at, was it San Marcos between Austin and El Paso? They're the other big ones. So it almost becomes what jurisdictions are kind of sandwiched between 2 urban areas generating a lot of traffic.
Just say what that metric is again.
It's the most daily vehicle miles traveled per capita as well as per lane mile in a given region or a given NPO. We're way up there.
Not who's generating, but who's experiencing
Yes,
the,
bingo.
the,
It doesn't matter if you're
Yeah.
generating trips. It's like if you're stuck in between 2 major corridors and you have to live with it, that's what's happening.
Okay.
So we had those functions building in. So you can start seeing that the traffic generation are a little bit different. So what about economic activity? So another thing that we started exploring is just focus on housing growth in the last 10 or 12 years. We can look at sales tax. We're kind of looking at data sources that we can pull on a consistent basis that's not going to really change from year to year. Well, the numbers will change, but it won't like disappear because somebody stopped counting it. And say, okay, is that an avenue that we can build into this formula? So finally, we can look at, say, okay, do you want to use density as a factor? Is there a kind of thing that we want to do a metric of density per, lane miles in a given facility? Getting back to the question of, we know that people are living here, they're using these roads here. How do you want to create a metric that kind of accurately calculates where we need to start investing in the CMAQ STG funding and create a formula that gives us a result that kind of makes not everybody thrilled, but we can live with that. So, Grandpa believes that we kind of need to research more. We've just kind of gotten the ball rolling, just grab a few of the federal highway data sets and the Census Bureau of Labor Statistics data sets, just so we can start collecting that information and find out. We'll kind of need to figure out how we want to divide up these off the top allocations. We'll have to figure out what we need to do for our regional transit partners, because while it's kind of jurisdiction focused, how do you start working that within the whole thought? And then we're going to have to figure out how to agree with that on a yearly basis. We want to do it every year. Do we want to do it every 2 years and park the money? How do y'all want to basically start dividing up funds so that y'all can fund your jurisdiction's priorities versus throwing the 5 at AMPO and see what's there?
So I guess before we dive into the details, I had just a basic kind of question. Are we absolutely certain, if we agree to some kind of approach with this, that Federal Highway and VDOT will basically approve it? The reason why I said that is I don't want us to do all this work on developing something. Then we can't do this approach.
So we got the letter from Federal Highways, which we included in the PAC last month for the previous TAC, where Steve, Federal Highways, said that we can follow the rough approach used by Virginia, and we can use those 2 ways of dividing up the pot. The one being that the localities can prioritize their own projects, not relative to each other, but within their allocation, which is done in Northern Virginia, and they would accept, Federal Highways would accept us doing that. And then we can come up with a formula to allocate funding to each of the applicants, the jurisdictions plus the transit agencies. But they want final approval on which type of formula we choose. So in other words, first answer is yes. The second answer is tentatively yes, but we just want to check that the formula you use doesn't include weird things that we're not comfortable with. So there's a review process before we can approve it. We do our work, decide on an approach. within those questions we ask them, not a whole bunch of things that we haven't asked them. Then we send it to them and say, before we go and approve this, are you okay with this particular set of metrics? So the approach is fine. They just want a final say over the metrics that we choose in whatever we put into the formula.
Member would still be required to at least do a nominal scoring just to make
Correct.
sure that, you know, CMAQ, you're not increasing, you know, air pollutants. So that would be.
So we would still do this, the current methodology that we have has a set of screening in criteria. And we would have to keep a screening in criteria for projects, and we would have to prove in the screening in criteria that that project does meet all the CMAQ criteria. That project does meet all the STGB criteria. Pampa would still have to do a score in a sense to make sure that we're not increasing air pollutants, etc., to get CMAQ money. So we would still have to do a scoring process, but we can introduce these two, if you like, criteria into the process to simplify it. So we wouldn't say your project is better, Stafford's project is better than Spotsylvania's project. That would be decided by a formula of allocating a percentage of the funds and your choice as to which of your projects you want to give most of the money to. It would take that process away, so it would be less of a bidding war, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, I get that. The other basic question though is with NVTA, they have an established process, which just, I guess, Federal Highway and VDOT are okay with.
So
What exactly do they do? And can we just kind of use what they do and apply it here?
So that's a very good question. They haven't written it down. I asked them for the document and they're like, we don't have a document. So I'm like, that is very weird. So they've got a high level process without a full document, unless they're not telling me the truth. I don't know. I asked multiple of them, had meetings with them, and they say, no, we haven't got a document that explains how we do the calculation. However, they've simplified it to doing, allowing the jurisdictions to rank their own projects and a process for dividing up the funds per jurisdiction by population only. They've got a slightly different region. They've got many counties and I think 2 cities incorporated. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a region with many players, right? Like 8 or something.
My former NPO actually built it into scoring methodology, like where each jurisdiction was basically guaranteed to receive funding from at least one project based on, basically, you're allowed to have a scoring pot. You can apply it to any project. If you apply all of that to one project, it was almost impossible to score below the next ranking project. So they did have a prioritization option. It was just scoring.
So they do rank your own projects in Northern Virginia, and we divide the funding up between the counties by population. Question we put to Federal Highways is, can we do that and use as a way to divide up the funding a formula of population plus another factor, right? And the reason for that is that we have this situation where the city of Fredericksburg, who's the third player, has a very small population, but lots of traffic. Just go back to your slide on population. It's right at the beginning, you had a pie chart, I think, there. So John is rounding that up to 9%, but in the 2020 census, not that.
I think it was the other one.
That one. So John is rounding up, but frankly, it's only 8.6% of the population lives in Fredericksburg. And if you then go down to your DMVT slide right at the end, there. So if you divide the DMVT by the population, you'll see that the city of Fredericksburg has an outsized impact on the transportation network than their population would suggest. Now, I'm not suggesting that Fredericksburg should get 37% of the money.
But if you do, that's okay.
But I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting,
Actually, you would really want this one is how much, vehicle miles per mile you would get half the thought, but yeah, that's.
so what I'm suggesting is that it's population plus a little bit for like the congestion impact, the traffic impact. Fredericksburg has to maintain a transportation system
Outsized for its,
outsized for its population, because it's not only Fredericksburg residents who are needing to travel through Fredericksburg. The train station is here, there are various other things. But I'm not suggesting that Fredericksburg gets 37% of the money. That would never fly. What I'm suggesting is it should be something a little more than just straight population, because otherwise I don't think we can get the policy committee to actually vote through a proposal, because there would be a big fight. So I'm suggesting that it should be population plus another factor, and I'm not suggesting any particular factor. It might be a congestion metric or a lane mile metric or a something other than just straight population, so that we can actually get it voted through, because otherwise I think we're gonna have screaming.
Matthew was first, I think the next second.
So now that this is an issue at the TAC level, but policy committee, for instance, it could come up, but are you guys gonna be looking at how funding is being generated?
Actually, that would be, something that we can build in with that.
Wait, I want to know what you mean.
Well, Stafford County generates 100% of the STBG.
I don't actually think that's true. I think that there are two parts of SDGB money, but we can check. Anyway, the point is, there is certainly more to it than just, I feel, population. I think we need to discuss that, and we need to take time and not rush this thing. We need to just think through all these metrics. And what I suggest we also build into the proposed methodology is that the factors in that formula can be adjusted every 5 years, because population will shift, congestion will shift, traffic will shift.
Priorities, but that's why I said we need an evergreen data source.
So I think you need to pick the data source, but then you give yourself every 5 years a chance to review that, so that if, for example, everybody leaves Fredericksburg, that might be something that might impact it. Or alternatively, Fredericksburg has a growth spurt, right? You don't know what the future is going to hold exactly. Jonathan's model tries to predict that, the state's model tries to predict that, but we don't know. So you sort of can work in like 5-year blocks. Every 5 years, the Weldon Food Center publishes 5-yearly big population updates. So you might say you'll use the census data, or you'll use Weldon Food data, and then every 5 years review the data. But you don't want to be changing it every year, because then then you might as well do away with the methodology and just, fight about how many dollars I get.
so I agree that, this process needs to be handled with care, because having gone through the previous process and, we need to get it right and then lock it down so that no sooner than every 5 years it changes, because I think someone's gonna bring up the idea, well, I didn't like that when we did it the last time, and then it's gonna have, every 2 years, every year and a half, someone's gonna want to change it. But I think ultimately, whatever this group decides should be the right methodology. Needs to align with the spirit of CMAQ and STBG as programs, right? These are programs that are designed to reduce congestion and mitigate for the negative impacts of air quality. Traditionally, they're used on active transportation, bike ped, transportation alternatives to single occupant vehicle boats. And so whatever metric is being used to break things down, don't pick a metric that incentivizes, like the VMT based one, right? That would basically incentivize a jurisdiction to produce more VMT, and then they're getting more money because they're producing more VMT at the detriment of, let's say today, Fredericksburg generates the smallest VMT of the region, but has the DVMT burden the highest, right? So make sure that it aligns with the spirit of the federal programs. Otherwise, you're just, throwing the money after the problem and
It's
making
a
it.
very good point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I should wait my turn to speak. Actually.
Okay. Any other comments from the committee?
Well,
Yes.
we've been grappling with this since it came up, and looking at how the population breaks down, and Tasmania and Stafford also projected to grow at a very substantial rate. Numbers for other localities even further. So I very much appreciate adding in these other metrics. I think it's a good start to look at how the actual transportation system flows currently, where it collects, and then having a responsive funding mechanism to respond to that. So that's very positive. Also appreciate Dick's comments. I think
So I guess I had another basic question with Northern Virginia. How do they deal with this? Because they have like Manassas and Leesburg. They have some cities or towns that I assume would be in a similar situation to Fredericksburg. So how do they deal with this?
I actually don't want to ask the question until I've checked, because I don't want to say something and then I've misled you. So would you give me till next month
Sure.
to just go and find that out? I'd rather just double check. I had the impression that they just used everything by population. So the county or the city would just get allocations by population, but I don't want to say that that is so, and then I find out later I said the wrong thing. So if you just give me till next month to check.
And in terms of the schedule for this, not in any rush to do anything.
No, I'm really glad that we're not in a rush, because I don't want to force this and then we have screaming. No, there's time. We can think through these options without pressure, lots of time to think about it. But I haven't heard anybody yet think that it's a bad idea to move from the current system to the system where you choose your own projects and rank them yourself, provided that they meet CMAQ criteria and SDGB criteria, and that we find some regular, you'll know for 5 years that you're going to get 38 or 42 or 12% of the money or whatever. I don't know what the numbers are.
Sure. We'll have to just note that we'll be parking the next round of money for 1 year as per the current methodology. So that will happen in, I would say, October, November.
Yeah. We have to actually only park it when we know how much it is. And that only happens in March. So until we have a new methodology, this current one is valid and continues to operate. And the current methodology says that the TAC will vote once VDOT gives us the allocation on parking the money for 1 more year. So we will have a vote, I'm assuming, towards the end of March on, okay, we've got 6.5 million this year. We will park it in this fashion. We will vote on that, and then it'll be parked. And that will give us a further year if we need to come up with a methodology. But the current methodology stands until such time as we change it. It doesn't stop operating. And it says that the TAC will decide to park the money so that we only do it every 2nd year. If we adopt a new methodology in the next year, of course, the new methodology would apply from the date of it. But yeah, I'll find out the answer to that piece of information, and I will check on the STGB as well, just so that we all have the same facts while we're all in a good mood and I think all the facts on the table.
So one question just with like the urbanized area and the STBG, I know some of that was at least based on the Virginia TMA. Question is with the 2030 census, we think that kind of Washington urbanized area will connect with Fredericksburg and will all be kind of the Washington TMA.
I think that the normal answer would be probably not yet, because it just gets a little closer every time. But also they have the opportunity as the Census Bureau to change the criteria every 10 years. Right. So we don't know that. However, if the new roadway that is in the smart scale application for the Enon connector happens, I'm guessing that land will get developed. And the same thing is if the Mine Road extension, a portion of that gets built, that area could be developed. And it's all about amount of impervious surface, rooftops, roadway surfaces, all that kind of thing as to whether the Census Bureau considers it to be joint. It's within that gap at the moment, it's all trees. So if it's no longer trees and it's a roadway that's been built plus some warehouses and some houses and some rooftops, then that says that the urbanized area now connects. So I think it's a question of what development happens in Stafford more than it is like the normal growth. I think it depends whether that road gets built, because no one can get access to that tree covered land right now. It's sort of out there. So if the access happens, the construction will happen, and then I think it's likely to close the gap.
So just to add on to that, the closest gap right now is east of I-95, the portion between like the Leland Road area and courthouse area. We do have a rezoning in right now for data centers, would significantly change the impervious surface area in that area. So it just depends if that gets approved and how much of that, where that is built out by 2030.
That's right.
So if the Census Bureau does not change their hop, skip, and jump, how they do that, if it's within close enough to the Leland Road area, which I'm not sure if it is, then we would merge. But if it's not close enough, then it won't be till 2040 or 2050.
Yeah, that's the question. The question is how many things that have got an impervious surface cover the ground in that gap? And
It definitely won't be based on population. It'll be based on the impervious surface area.
yeah,
We don't expect much population growth in those areas east or west of
with the rate that Stafford's population is growing and the number of new warehouses built in and all big buildings built in Spotsylvania and Stafford, the Stafford one is the one that matters for the bridging the gap. And I think at the rate it's happening now, it's likely not because of the normal incremental growth, but because there's land there that's available to be developed in a sense.
Isn't it also based off of, it's based off of the TMA, right? If it's over 200,000, 300,000 population. So if the Fredericksburg urbanized area is over the certain amount of residential, that would also trigger
That would also
STBG not just being generated by North Stafford,
Correct.
being generated by Fredericksburg.
If the southern Stafford, northern Spotsy, and the city of Fredericksburg population grows
So
over that number, over 200,000, but we're only at
640, yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Something that'll happen.
quite a big jump in 10 years. It will happen.
Yeah.
Like by 2050 or something, it will happen. But whether you will add, 40,000 people in that area in 10 years, I have my doubts about that.
2040 is a lot more likely than 2030, but not impossible.
Thank you.
And the Stafford to the west is right up to their boundary. So if Fauquier builds anything other side of the boundary, that changes also the institutional arrangements of FAMPA. Automatically, Fauquier County becomes part of FAMPA. And the same thing with Spotsylvania boundary and Caroline. You're right up to the boundary in terms of the Census Bureau's urbanized area because of the impervious surface. Over the border, there's no water and sewer right now, but should Caroline County install it and that some houses get built there, Caroline County would automatically become part of FAMPA. So those are the things we don't know. I don't think it's likely though, because I can't see Caroline putting in water and sewer out in the boonies.
Yeah, right now we have some projects that are putting water and sewer like in there, but it's for data centers, Caroline. So I'm not aware of any houses. I think like with Spotsylvania join, they're more likely the Route 3 Route to Orange, but I'm not sure how close that is.
The gap is bigger with Caroline and with Fauquier. It's not about the gap. It's about whether anything gets built close to the boundary.
Right.
Is Lake of the Woods a urban area to your census or no? I know it was in 2010. They changed the policy. It still is, because King George lost its status.
I believe it is.
Okay.
We'll come back with some more information, and as we go, you guys can tell us things you really don't like and things you do like, and we'll eventually get down to something that hopefully we'll all agree on.
Thank you, Ian. So we can go to the next topic, which is a 8D Smart Skill Round 6 discussion with Ms. Curies.
Morning. All right, so you may remember a few months ago, the TAC had expressed interest in sending a letter to the secretary and CPP about our comments and concerns about this round of smart scale. So now that the applications are in, it's time to have sort of wrap up discussion about all of that in preparation for our letter and just gather our thoughts about this round. So
The aim at the bottom.
Is this the right presentation?
this isn't the right presentation. I need the smart scale. Oh, sorry. It's okay. No.
Click on smart scale.
There you go. All right, here we go. Okay, so to that end, I've just posted some discussion topics here so we can kind of be organized about this. But round 6 process, so that's basically like the sort of timeline for the changes, how late things started, like their review kind of started in May of 2023. How you had to sort of listen to the CTB meetings to find out what the heck is going on, that sort of thing. Their policy and their scoring, how they did the removal of funding for step 2, their other policies, how you felt about that. The technical guide, how the tech guide came out late and was kind of confusing in its wording. The technical guidance from the OIP, their communication, how they sort of flip-flopped on some things and their interpretation of the technical guide, and your local VDOT support, how they had a lot of pressure from the state to not give any support and how they did so, even so, quite a lot in some cases. And so if you just want to sort of structure your conversation based on these, and I will let you guys discuss this, and Sherry, you can sort of base comments.
And if we can just, at the end, agree what the outcome is that we want from this process. For example, do we now finish that letter and send a letter, or do we want to just document things to do better next time for us? Or do we want to ask the public to do something? Those questions then come at the end, like what do we want to do about the process, the good and the bad?
I have a couple of, I guess, basic questions. Do we know if the state is going to do the fall meetings this year where they solicit input from MPOs and localities?
So since the new secretary has arrived, he has dispersed with the fall meetings every year since he arrived. He has done the spring meetings to get the 6-year plan, public comment on the 6-year plan, but he has dispensed with the fall hearings. Question is whether he would this year call for the fall hearings. My guess is probably not, but I've not been officially informed of anything.
So it sounds like there's going to be no official kind of state kind of opportunity to give input. So I guess if we do a letter, like, did we have a target time when we want to try to get that together by?
So this would be, we'd gather all these comments, we would talk to the policy committee this month and ask, kind of let them know what your will is, that you can send a letter. And if they agree to that, then we would draft the letter and have it for their approval next month.
And for the TAC next month too.
Yes, well, yes, it would go before you guys first. The letter, do you agree to this letter? And then it would go to the policy committee.
And is the Virginia Association of MPOs doing anything with this, or is it just us?
I'm not aware. We have our meeting this afternoon, so I'll know more after this afternoon, but I am not aware of them having a formal process. They're grumpy though. I think we're going to hear this afternoon about the grumpiness, but I don't know what steps they plan to take.
Decide to send a letter.
I'll ask this afternoon what the feeling is.
So in terms of what we're trying to do, we're trying to give maybe some constructive feedback, stay look at this on the application process.
And the technical part.
Right, exactly.
So I'll just throw this out there. This is the highest bar. It will not happen. But my comment every single round is I wish they would actually tell us how projects were scored. Not a black box that we can't FOIA, but an actual technical guidance that says, here's the decay values, here's the whatever equation they use for congestion, all of that. They want us to submit better projects. They should then tell us how projects are scored so we can submit projects that are good projects. It's never happened before and they will say no, but keep throwing it out there.
What's the rationale that they provide? Have you gotten?
I've never received an answer.
My comment on the first bullet, if we start at the top and move down, is that for me, the problem with the process currently is the timeline doesn't work. Because the projects, some of them are connected to pipeline studies, and then in the C2B changes the technical guide and the scoring criteria late in the game, like the November, December, January, and even February of the last year when we were about to submit. The cart gets before the horse. So you do all the work on the projects yourself. VDOT runs pipeline studies, which in my mind are underfunded and produce the outcomes very late. Then once you're done with that and you've got the consultant about to produce the final documents, then the technical guide appears, and usually with a whole bunch of changes from the C2B at the last minute. Now you can't go back and undo your study, right? Or undo the pipeline study or the STAR study. You're stuck. Whatever that study put out, that's what you have. And if it doesn't meet the new criteria that they've only just published in February on the guide, you can do nothing now to really fix everything. You've identified the solution, which is this project X, and they don't want project X this round. They want project Y. That is a problem. The timeline of the technical guide, the pipeline and other studies, STAR studies, self-studies, and the criteria that they're going to use this round don't match because the timeline is off. They should be now changing the technical guide for next round, not in the February before submission. That's too late to change your project sufficiently to meet the new criteria. I think that timeline doesn't.
Yes.
That's the biggest issue we had, what Ian just spoke about. If you look at how the process played out, we submitted pre-applications in November, assuming that Smart Scale was going to score similar to previous rounds, which favored active transportation. We had transportation projects only to find out basically the day before or a week before that the pre-applications, we did pre-applications, VDOT invested time in working on this stuff. Only to find out a week before our pre-applications were due that the scoring had changed, the entire process had changed, and we pivoted into other roadway specific projects, which then we had consistent issues with the process and ultimately weren't screened out, even though in the end we produced viable projects because we couldn't then meet that very lengthy time frame that starts in November. People just couldn't get their heads around it. So I would put a finer point on it in a letter and say that if they cannot provide technical guidance prior to opening our pre-application process in November, they should not throughout the entire process. It goes a waste of everybody's time.
Are there any other comments from the committee?
I guess a question for VDOT. Have we heard when we're going to be starting STARS and pipeline studies yet?
So I'm in sessions with TMPT, STARS one, and then for pipeline, they're supposed to be starting in January.
So it's, I guess, earlier than last year. It's not kind of.
So, Chairman, are we taking questions on all 6 of those bullets, 5 of those bullets, or are we doing them sequentially? I just asked because I don't want to waste your time.
Well, I guess the one thing, so we could kind of talk about this for the next 2 hours. And we don't want to do that. I want to try to finish the meeting by about 11:30. What if we did this? What if all the committee members that were involved in Smart Scale gave their comments to the FAMPO staff by some deadline? I'm thinking maybe the end of this month. And then we talk about it, basically at the next.
One of the things that we do have to do, and I'll say this comment later, but the last 2 weeks of this year's process was a circus. We got some information too late. VDOT's own consultant only gave them some of the materials, like,
Hours.
well, I got
Nothing in
the
hours.
last pack 30 minutes before the published deadline of 5 p.m. They actually didn't lock it down at 5 p.m. So we got lucky and we could carry on submitting. But when you get the Route 3 materials 30 minutes before deadline, what do you do with that? I can't check 5 words. I'm supposed to send it to the localities to review. It became a pointless exercise to review it. So if there are errors in there, it's too bad. So, you know, the timeline on this whole thing was just,
Chaotic. That one.
That you handled it, well, Kathy.
I tried.
I mean, people's tempers didn't fray, so thank you all for that, because it wasn't good, right? It really wasn't good, and thanks everybody for not losing their mind. But we can't be getting from consultants 30 minutes before deadline. We can never have that again. It just, it won't work.
I'll also say the biggest issues that, at least on the staff side, we had were not during that, last day. It was after, when we were told, no, you did your analysis wrong, you needed to do it this way, and now we have to rush to do it by additional stuff. That's ridiculous and should not happen ever again.
Actually, I must compliment on Stafford on one thing. I did not expect you to get in the project that your consultant was handling on time, and I was proved wrong. You actually got in on time perfectly. So congratulations, because I was telling Gary, oh, this is going to be a disaster. And then Matthew was putting us all the documents on time, and I was like, wow.
So I see like the October TAC is on the 7th. So basically, going back to the next steps, if we give comments to FAMPO basically by September 30th, that'd be a week in advance. That would be okay with staff.
Carrie, are you okay with that? September 30th to get all comments from everybody on the smart scale process to be emailed to you, and then you can compile them.
And have a letter,
What?
No, we're not doing a letter. We just want to have synthesized comments and just talk about it at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
So a summary, you'll produce like a summary
Sure.
based on what everybody sends.
Discuss everybody's comments.
And then if
Yes.
they want to decide on a letter, they can decide after that, based on whatever's in that document.
Yeah, we can do that. Just send them to me.
Great. You'll send out a reminder to us to do this.
You know me. Send them.
Great.
Good. So next item is correspondence.
We are light on correspondence this month. I don't actually think we got any new correspondence.
Staff report on.
Okay. So next item is staff reports.
Yes, so we did ask you to look at the functional classifications, and we got from Spotsylvania a nice comprehensive list, so thank you to Spotsy for doing that. We would just, and the list is attached there to your agenda. We would just ask Fredericksburg and Stafford to please do this. Cassie, did we say we want any inputs by the end of September?
Yeah, I would say by the end of September, we're going to have too many input you guys have. We have to look at traffic engineers, we're going to have to look at,
Doesn't warrant it, or the data available that's
Right.
and so on.
then any input you guys give us, then we have to give back to TMPD. And they can easily say no. So it doesn't matter what we look at and everything, even if we agree with you, when we give it to TMPD, they might not agree with us.
And only after that can we, as FAMPO, sign a letter saying we support it. So please do, before the end of September, get all of your comments from Stafford and the city, please. It's just any functional classifications that you think should change within your jurisdiction. If you're happy with them all staying the same, then that's fine. We just don't want you to feel later that you never had an opportunity.
I had just one comment on Garrison Road, which was already addressed, I think. So staff is probably good, but I'll do a second review.
Just send us an email, and if the email says we're all good, we're happy.
And assuming they add new roads that VDOT built into this.
Just put that in your email.
Yeah.
And then the other one is, if we're going to do scenario planning for the 2055 LRTP update, which is now in FY 27. It's years away, right? But you've got to do these things in a sequence. So last time FAMPO had scenario planning was in 2012. Okay, so think about that. What is scenario planning? Well, you don't just look at transportation, you look at zoning changes in jurisdictions, approvals that haven't been built yet. You have to get regular planning staff from the jurisdictions together with transportation planning staff and talk about what's going on in the region, and then run some scenarios to see what that will impact, which means usually a travel demand model run. And there's the new, is it called Vision Eval software, I think, that is free of charge available to us in order to, on top of the travel demand model, run some scenarios. Typically, though, you want an outside facilitator and a workshop so that any one individual is not seen to be driving this process from the region, but it's an objective person. So I reached out to one or two consultants to see what they would charge to assist us and write a report. And the report doesn't just become a report, it also becomes the scenario planning chapter in the LRTP. Last time I did a quick and dirty on my own laptop, right? I don't recommend we ever do that again. All I did was create 3 scenarios, convinced VDOT to run their travel demand model for us, took the outputs and wrote that up in a scenario planning chapter because I inherited the LRTP when it was half done. So, and we didn't have funds to do anything more. So an actual workshop of scenario planning has been done since 2012, and I suggest that we should not be writing that chapter just on my laptop with my own ideas. We should really have you guys and the zoning and whatever planning staff of the jurisdictions involved in that and do a proper workshop. So I don't know what that costs. So I reached out to a couple of people and there's an answer we got, which is you can do it cheap and dirty, you can do an expensive Rolls Royce and everything in between. Tell us what level of work you want to do and we can do a cost that fits with the level of work involved. So I just gave that feedback now just to give TAC members an idea of the range of costs that could be involved in doing a scenario planning exercise. We don't have funding allocated to it right now. We're not going to decide on that today, but when we do have that discussion, at least you've got some rough numbers to work with. Like when we say, well, how much does it cost? Instead of having a blank slate, there are some numbers. It can cost $75,000 or it can cost $300,000. There's a whole range depending on what level of scenario planning you want to do. And I suggest we could probably do some of the work in-house and then get a facilitator to run the work. So it doesn't have to be a $300,000 project. It could be a much less expensive project.
Could we look into what it cost last time? I know it's obviously prices.
2012.
Prices changed, but I feel like it was upwards of 200,000 or 300,000 even back in 2012.
Those of you around longer than me, Paul wasn't even here in 2012.
Yeah, I know it was expensive, and I'll say just with the FAMPO board, there were some changes where there were kind of Spotsylvania and Stafford board members came on around kind of 2012, 2013, they kind of shut it down. Didn't really like it, so I'm not sure, what the present board would think about it, but it was controversial fast.
I don't want to, so that's my thing is I don't want to start on this without everybody thinking through it. And so I want the TAC to think about it. I want the policy committee to think about it. And then once I get a feeling from the TAC and a feeling from the policy committee of what we should do about this, then I'll start preparing something. But I want to just, again, slowly think about this. I just feel like there are land use changes that are happening which have impacts on transportation that we need to find a way of bringing into this process. And scenario planning is usually the way that you do that.
I mean, I really like the idea of exploring this because, we've said through our system plan process, we don't have resources to go and study every station's micro area potential for transit supported land use and all that. That's really the jurisdiction's responsibility. But if in this region, it can be done on a regional level, like one of the scenarios is, a very intense use of land around VRE stations, for example, and what are the results of that? What does that do to the funding mix transportation system? That's going to be a huge key that we're really hoping that this region will take on, because we're not ever gonna do it. I don't think our board would ever support us studying land use, like, on our own.
Because you don't have any control over that.
We don't have any control over it yet. It's a jurisdictional, it's a regional responsibility.
The Infrastructure and Jobs Act says that we're supposed to link transportation infrastructure in future to land use and housing in particular, but they don't tell us how to do that. It's just this like, you need to do this, but silence on how you're supposed to. Somebody here wanted to say something.
Any other comments?
Okay, so think about it. We'll come back with an ask once we have more information, and then we can decide if we're going to do it or not. I'll also chat to the policy committee at a very high level. What do you all think of this idea? If they want to shut it down, then they can shut it down before we start. And if they want to do it, they can give us a feel for what we should do.
Very good. So the last item is basically member reports. Any member reports?
Sorry, Carrie's
I'm sorry.
bicycle. The staff report's the last one from Carrie.
So sorry about that.
Unless we work.
Just do it quick and dirty.
So, this is basically a proposal for a project that is essentially to enhance things you're already doing in your localities, the complete streets for the urbanized area of Fampo. So in case you don't already know, Complete Streets is designing roadway networks to prioritize the safety of all users. Federal funding is available through IIJA to facilitate this. There's several new and existing funding streams for this, including in unexpected places like the National Highway Freight Program. Fredericksburg, Spotsy, and Stafford are all working or have completed their own bike pedestrian programs and would benefit from the increased funding opportunities provided by having a coordinated regional plan in place that complements what you've already got. So the idea is Fampo staff will collaborate with you on identifying network gaps, developing context-sensitive appropriate connection routes, and creating a network for the Fampo urbanized area. What we would do would be to look at your local plans that you're already developing from a regional approach and help you connect and create a comprehensive regional plan. It's a lot of working with what you've already got, just putting it all together in a comprehensive way. The plan would include research on funding sources and would be somewhat similar to the 2021 Greenway Plan, but that was a huge effort, a high level effort, and was for the whole 5 jurisdiction area. And this would be scope limited and highly focused on only the urbanized area. It would be detailed with specific facility recommendations and would draw heavily from your own comprehensive plan and our analysis. So the idea, it's already in the UPWP for FY25, and it's an effort to help us achieve better funded, comprehensive, and regionally consistent multi-mode planning. But it needs buy-in from you guys. So I'll be reaching out to the locality planners in the coming weeks to talk about how we can do this together. Questions?
So Fampo has funding to do this. You just kind of want our partnership and trying to advance this in FY25?
Sorry, repeat yourself, Paul.
Basically, there's the funding to do this. You just want the local kind of partnership to advance the.
Yeah, this will be sort of info sharing and working together on this.
So we're not gonna hire a consultant.
Nope.
We're not gonna do a big expensive project. We're gonna do it in-house. Carrie is gonna lead the program, work with the jurisdictions. And the idea is just to make sure that in the urban areas, we're aligning bike ped and to a degree transit where we can. And then produce a document which can then be used for funding when we go to federal sources. We can say, yes, we have a complete streets plan for bike and ped and all this. Here's the plan, supports your funding application. And in the plan, we're going to identify new sources that people haven't thought of before to match funding with the projects that are listed there. And then we're going to just gently nudge the jurisdictions to, with striping on their bike paths and stuff like that. So we can try and get this moved along a little bit and encourage Fred to put some bus shelters up where we can. Just gentle nudges.
Yes, Matthew?
I guess just a more higher level question, I guess just maybe rhetorical also, but just the thought of the 2050 active transportation plan, the 2020 agreement plan, and then the 2025 complete streets plan, can that all be made into one thing that's cohesive in nature or something? Just throwing that out there for thought. This would be the third multimodal plan, not saying that's bad, because they all have their different pieces
They have
to them.
different pieces and they can,
But how can they all relate to each other or build into one plan in the end for the 2055 LRTP or something?
So you.
all be part of the.
Yeah.
2055 LRTP will bring them together, but this is urban areas.
Yep.
So the Greenways plan is lots of these long, like the East Coast Greenway type projects. Nothing wrong with that, but we're gonna just focus on the urbanized area and create a thing that's called a complete streets plan, because that language is important for federal funding in some of these funding programs. So we're gonna try and connect, for example, the nice, sorry for picking on Fredericksburg, but every time I think about this project, it irritates me because it was never completely finished, right? We put all the concrete down for the Cowan Boulevard shared use path on the south side of Cowan Boulevard. And then we stopped and we didn't put the striping, we didn't put a sign that says you can cycle on the sidewalk. The city has got a bylaw that says you may not cycle on any sidewalks. And so it's there, it's mostly there, but to connect it on to other projects, you're working on that already. But let's put it in a plan called the whatever plan, and then we help by recommending people who can pay for it. So we finish it, right? The concrete's there in that particular case, but not the connections, not the signage, not the lines painted on the thing so that people know they can cycle there, for example.
Does serve a different purpose from the Greenway plan. They're quite different. They're interconnected and they'll all be in the LRT.
Thank you, Carrie. So you'll send an email to us about this? Yes, sounds great.
Thank you.
No money needed currently.
Now we're on to member reports. Are there any member reports?
So for VDOT, we are looking for locality day, either October, November. I'm getting everyone at strict availability right now. Trying to figure out what that's going to look like. We'll be holding it at probably the district auditorium. Sometime in October, November, we'll be sending out stuff to all about it.
Little coffee
Probably,
available.
maybe.
Even better than Fanto's coffee.
It will, yeah, I'll bring them in. It will be in person. We won't be doing a virtual option. So, but we would expect planning and then also probably county administrators to be having everyone there. So I'll be putting that in the email invitation stuff about who we would want to see there from the localities.
They're
Okay,
maximum.
I have to say, you're welcome to use our facility if need be. The air
Well, that's why I'm waiting to the end of October, November time is to
Oh,
hope
no,
that
no,
our
no.
district auditorium is back open.
You just sparked a quick thought. Eugene, why don't you stand up again? So Eugene is our new public engagement person. If you are looking for surveys to be completed for your county, because you have a comprehensive plan update or a transportation project or VDOT or DRPT as something public should attend or comment on or take a survey, please communicate with Eugene. Eugene will then send out emails. We'll put it on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and wherever else to promote your project. If any of our transit agencies have a bike to work day or a, come ride BRE free on a Friday, then Eugene's the person, Eugene's your guy to communicate. So please contact Eugene when you have any of those things. Sorry, Chair.
Oh,
Nick, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. Once
Quick
more.
question. Is there a maximum number of people you're looking at for each locality? Because when you say, yes, plan, transportation staff, county administration, a lot of people in the middle of that. So I don't know if they would want to or if they
All your
could.
school teachers.
I think it's gonna.
Yeah,
But I don't want to have that. There's a lot of times. Person be, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is great if you're. there are, I mean, I think it's bringing more important. The local furniture to be not the exclusion of that. But they may not have the questions. They may not get as much. Let's figure out when and where we're going to be holding the event. That's a little bit too about.
Cassie, are there any other?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Real quick, VRE is hosting its 4th annual tour to VRE, October 5th. That's the first Saturday in October. I want to stress it's a ride, not a race. And even more so, we are now, this year going to be riding on the Manassas line. So the course is going to be starting at the Backlick Road Station, 9 o'clock. And riding to Broad Run, where we'll have a finish line activity, just as we did. For those of you who participated last year in Fredericksburg, we'll be doing the same thing, but better at Broad Run. I will say we are likely to have transportation. We're definitely going to have some kind of transportation. High likelihood it will be a train, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. From Broad Run up to Backlick. So for the folks in this region, if you wanted to participate, you could drive to Broad Run, up on the train, or transportation up to Backlick and start the ride. Registration is $25. We're trying to defray the cost of finish line swag and stuff like that. So some of that is actually going to be donated to the Breast Cancer Foundation that we're doing this kind of in partnership with. So I believe we'll be allowing folks to register until the week before. So go on VRE's website. There's a big banner. You can't miss it. It says Tour to VRE. And sign up, but it's $25 entrance fees.
Thank you, Nick.
Mhm.
Any other member reports? Okay, hearing none, the next TAC meeting is Monday, October 7th, 9:30 here, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Nick, what's the winner?
What's that? What's the winner? We're all gonna be winners.
So,
In a bad spot.